The transfer van was scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock, and by 9 in the morning, everyone at Harlan Regional Medical Center had already made up their minds about the man in Bay 4. He'd been brought in just after 6, found on the shoulder of Route 44 near the Elm Street overpass by a woman on her way to open a pharmacy, slumped against the guardrail with blood in his hair and no identification on him. The paramedics had charted him as unresponsive on arrival, combative upon waking, speech disorganized. The ER attending, Dr. Griffin Lowe, had ordered a CT, reviewed the results, and by 7:15 had recommended a psychiatric hold with transfer to Cumberland Valley Behavioral Health in Middlesboro. The nurse's station had the paperwork ready before breakfast. Celeste Rourke heard all of this secondhand from Adele Cho, the charge nurse, who delivered it with the tired efficiency of someone who'd had the same conversation 100 times. He took a swing at one of the techs. Lowe says he's incoherent, possible intox, CT shows minor contusion, nothing that explains the presentation. Transfer set for 2, just need someone to babysit Bay 4 until the van gets here. It fell to Celeste because she was the one whose assignment board had an opening and because she was the kind of nurse that things fell to. Not the most senior on the floor, not the loudest in a room, but consistently, reliably present. She'd been at Harlan Regional for 3 years. She knew the rhythms of the place the way you know the creaks in the floor of a house you've lived in long enough. She pushed open the curtain to Bay 4 with a clipboard in one hand and a cup of water in the other. The man was not what she expected. He was somewhere in his late 50s, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that comes from physical work and not a gym. His hands rested on top of the blanket, large hands, the knuckles nicked in old places, the palms calloused in the way that Celeste recognized from her father, who'd spent 40 years working maintenance at a coal operation outside Harlan. He was not agitated. He was not combative. He was lying still, his head turned toward the window, watching the rain move down the glass with an expression that looked, to Celeste, unmistakably like fear. He heard her come in and turned to look at her. His eyes were clear. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the glassy, floating look of someone intoxicated, not the fixed brightness of a manic episode. Clear and brown and exhausted, the eyes of a man who had been trying very hard to be understood and had spent the last 3 hours failing at it. He said something. The words came out broken like a sentence with most of the connective tissue stripped out. 44. A pause. Elm. Watch. He stopped. Tried again. Watch. Celeste set the clipboard on the counter. She set the cup of water on the tray table. And then she did something that apparently no one had done in Bay 4 that morning. She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down. He looked at her like she'd done something remarkable. She said, "I'm Celeste. I'm going to be your nurse this morning, okay? You don't have to talk. I just want you to know I'm here." He didn't stop trying to talk. He said 44 again, slowly, like he was certain of that number at least, like it was the one anchor he had. She sat with him for 15 minutes before Dr. Lowe found her. Lowe was not an unkind man. He was a tired one. He'd been working the Eastern Kentucky ER circuit for 11 years, had seen enough people come through Bay 4 in various states of crisis to have developed, through no particular fault of his own, a kind of categorical efficiency. He looked at the scene, Celeste in the chair, the patient calm, and said, "Transfer paperwork done?" "Almost," Celeste said. "Dr. Lowe, can I ask, what exactly did the CT show?" "Minor contusion, left temporal region, nothing surgical." "Has anyone considered aphasia, the temporal lobe?" The tech he hit wasn't hit by a man with aphasia. He was agitated and combative when they tried to move him. Lowe lowered his voice, the professional register of someone ending a conversation while appearing to continue it. "Rourke, I know you want to dig in on every one of these, but the van comes at 2. Let's get him stable and paperwork done." He left. Celeste looked at the man in the bed, who had watched the entire exchange with those clear brown eyes, tracking Lowe as he went. "He doesn't believe me," the man said. The sentence was clear, perfect. Then, as if the effort had cost him something, his face tightened and whatever channel had opened briefly closed again. He tried to say something else. It came out fractured. "Watch." "No." He pressed his hand against his temple. The watch. He had. "Okay," Celeste said quietly. "I heard you." She went through his belongings, logged in the plastic bag that hung from the IV pole. A wallet, empty of cash, but there, a laminated ID from the Harlan County School District, Dominic Farrell, bus driver, assigned Route 44. She looked at the ID for a long moment. Route 44. She thought about the road she drove to work. Route 44, off which you turned onto Elm Street if you were heading into the east side of town. Dominic, she said, coming back to his side, Route 44, Elm Street, is that where you were? His hand came up. He pointed at her, not aggressively, but with the precise, urgent gesture of someone trying to say yes with their entire body. Something happened there. Another gesture, yes. Did you see something happen? He nodded once, hard, and his jaw worked. Black car. The words came clear again, surfacing. No plate. He stopped. His face went through something complicated, like a man watching the word he needs recede just out of reach. He got out. He looked, and then he closed his eyes. Then he drove. Celeste stayed very still. He drove away. Dominic opened his eyes and looked at her, and what was in his face wasn't confusion. It was the particular anguish of a witness who has seen something terrible and has been trying to report it for hours to people who keep handing him paper cups and talking over him. She said, "I'll be right back." The hit and run had come in 40 minutes after Dominic. Celeste found it in the system when she went to the nurse's station and pulled up that morning's admits. Nina Ferris, 34 years old, found by a motorist on Caldwell Avenue, 3 blocks east of the Route 44 and Elm Street intersection. Blunt force trauma, bilateral rib fractures, severe head injury. She was in the ICU on the 3rd floor, and she was not expected to make it through the week. Nina Ferris. Celeste didn't recognize the name. She searched the local paper's website on her phone, found a brief mention in an article from 2 months ago. Nina Ferris, a 5th-grade teacher at Harlan Elementary, had filed a formal complaint with the school board regarding the condition of a contracted facility used for after-school programming. The complaint had been filed against a vendor whose contract with the county had been authorized by the county council. The council. Celeste set the phone down. She found Detective Roy Stanton in the family waiting area off the main corridor. He was a compact man in a gray suit working through his phone with the concentrated frown of someone who has too many cases and not enough hours. He'd been assigned the Ferris case. "Mr. Stanton," Celeste said, "I need to talk to you about the man in Bay 4. He looked up. "The psychiatric transfer?" "He's not psychiatric. He's a witness. I think he saw what happened to Nina Ferris." Stanton listened with the practiced patience of a man who heard a lot of things from well-meaning people who turned out to be wrong. When she finished, he said, "The attending physician assessed him as incoherent." "He told me the intersection," Celeste said. "He told me there was a black car with no license plate. He told me the driver got out, looked at her, and drove away. That's not incoherence. That's a witness who's having trouble with word retrieval, and there's a difference." Stanton was quiet for a moment. He put his phone in his jacket pocket, which was, Celeste had learned in her years of dealing with people in institutional settings, a meaningful gesture. "We pulled security footage from the gas station on 44, he said slowly. "There's a vehicle. But," he stopped. "But what?" "It's registered to the county fleet." The words sat between them in the fluorescent quiet of the waiting room. "A county vehicle," Celeste said. "Ma'am." If Dominic Farrell gets transferred to Cumberland Valley at 2 o'clock today, he goes into a system where a coherent statement could take weeks to obtain. Months. She kept her voice level, the same voice she used when she needed a family member to understand something difficult. Whoever was driving that vehicle will have had time to explain it, repair it, or lose it entirely. Dominic is the only one who saw the driver's face. Stanton stood. He was quiet for another moment, the quiet of a man recalibrating. "Then I'm going to need to call this in. You have about an hour and a half before that transfer van arrives." The next 45 minutes were not smooth. Stanton put in a request to delay the transfer under investigative authority. Dr. Lowe, to his credit, did not immediately capitulate. He stood in the hallway outside Bay 4 and argued his position with the calm certainty of a man who'd been right before and expected to be right again. The patient was a risk to staff. The psychiatric recommendation was medically appropriate. Involving law enforcement in a clinical transfer decision was a violation of the process. Stanton held his ground. It's my witness. With respect, detective, you don't have a witness. You have an incoherent man in a hospital bed. Celeste, standing to the side, said nothing. There was a time for that conversation, and it wasn't now. She turned and went back into Bay 4. She pulled the chair close to Dominic's bed. She had her phone in her hand, open to the Harlan County government website. A public directory, photographs included. She had a notepad. She explained to him, carefully and without rushing, what she needed. She was going to ask him questions. He could nod or shake his head. If she showed him something, he could point. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You got paper?" She handed him the notepad and a pen. His hand was unsteady, but he wrote, slowly, with the effortful concentration of someone fighting their own nervous system. He wrote 3 letters, TED. He looked at her and pointed at the county directory on her phone. Celeste scrolled. The Harlan County Council page, 6 members. She turned the screen toward him and watched his face as she moved through the photographs one by one. When she got to Councilman Theodore Malone, Dominic Farrell's hand came up from the bed and pointed, and his finger did not waver. She photographed the screen. Stanton took the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. He made a call. Another call. He was on the phone in the corridor for 20 minutes, and when he came back, the transfer van had been formally held. By noon, investigators had located the county Suburban assigned to Councilman Malone's office. Found in a private garage off Route 421, the front quarter panel and hood showing damage consistent with a high-speed pedestrian impact. The garage owner would later say he'd been asked that morning to look at a fender by a man he recognized but had not named voluntarily. Malone had attended a Rotary Club breakfast that morning. He'd left early, his aide confirmed, wasn't feeling well. He'd driven himself in the county vehicle, which he had authorization to use. He'd been home by 9. He was arrested at his home at 3:17 that afternoon. Dominic Farrell did not go to Cumberland Valley Behavioral Health. He was admitted properly, transferred to neurology, where an MRI ordered by Dr. Annabella Torres. The neurologist on call who reviewed his case late that morning revealed what the initial CT had not fully captured: a moderate traumatic brain injury with involvement of the left temporal and parietal regions, areas implicated in language processing and word retrieval. He had not been incoherent. He had been injured in precisely the part of his brain that governs the ability to translate thought into speech. Everything he understood was intact. Everything he knew was in there, complete and clear. The pathways to get it out had been damaged. It was, Dr. Torres told the nursing staff in the corridor, a textbook presentation of Broca's adjacent aphasia in a trauma context. Treatable, not psychiatric. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. His speech returned unevenly, the way these things do. Words appearing and disappearing, some days better than others, the language coming back in patches like sunlight through cloud cover. He had physical therapy, speech therapy, and a neurology team that finally understood what they were dealing with. Celeste visited when she could, which was not as often as she would have liked. She brought him coffee from the machine down the hall, bad coffee, and she apologized for it, and he waved the apology off with the slow ease of a man who has decided not to waste time on small complaints. He told her in their 3rd visit that he'd tried to stop. When he saw the Suburban hit Nina Ferris and the driver slow and look and pull away, Dominic had stopped his bus, Route 44, no kids aboard yet, first pass of the morning, and run to where she was lying. He'd called 911 from his personal phone. And then the Suburban had come back around the block, slow, and pulled to the curb 30 yards away, and the driver had gotten out and stood there watching Dominic kneel next to Nina in the road. He'd looked at the man. The man had looked at him. Dominic had stayed with Nina until the ambulance arrived. Then he'd walked back to his bus and driven. He got 3 blocks before his vision started doubling, and his left hand stopped responding to commands. He managed to get the bus to the shoulder before he lost consciousness. He still didn't know exactly what had happened to his head, whether the impact had been from something, or whether the brain injury had been caused by some other mechanism of the morning's violence that he couldn't quite reconstruct. He supposed it didn't matter. What mattered, he said, was this: I knew what I saw. I knew the whole time. I couldn't get it out. He looked at his hands. That's a terrible thing, to be sitting there with all of it inside you and not be able to make it come out. Celeste thought about the words she'd heard from people in hospitals over 3 years of working nights and days, and the in-between shifts that don't have a clean name. She thought about the things that get lost in the noise of an ER, the things that fall through the cracks of a system built for speed and category, for moving bodies through the machine efficiently and sending them on to the next place. She thought about how close it had been. Nina Ferris survived. The word, when it came, was cautious. She would need months of rehabilitation, and there would be lasting effects, and no one was making promises. But she was alive in late July when Celeste heard the news. Alive and awake and reportedly talking. Dr. Lowe issued no formal apology. He was not, Celeste suspected, a man who did that readily. But she noticed that he began ordering neurological consultations more readily on certain types of patients after that. Patients who didn't fit cleanly, who presented with communication difficulties that ran against their apparent level of consciousness. He never mentioned it to her. She never mentioned it to him. Sometimes that's what progress looks like. Celeste received a formal written reprimand for delaying a physician-authorized transfer and for contacting law enforcement without physician involvement. The document was placed in her personnel file by hospital administration. She read it twice, folded it, and put it away. Adele Cho watched all of this happen. Adele had been a nurse for 26 years, had worked in 3 states, and had a particular sensitivity to institutional injustice, born from having encountered it at regular intervals her entire career. She went to the chief nursing officer 3 days after the reprimand was issued. Celeste never knew exactly what Adele said in that meeting. She only knew that 4 months later she was asked to join a small working group convened to develop a standardized screening protocol for the Harlan Regional ER. A protocol specifically designed to differentiate between psychiatric presentation, substance-related presentation, and neurologically based communication impairment in trauma patients. The kind of protocol that would prompt a clinician to ask different questions, order different tests, consider different possibilities before defaulting to the category that was easiest to act on. It took 8 months to develop, another 3 months to pilot. It was not perfect. No protocol is, but it gave nurses a framework, a set of prompts, a decision tree, a set of questions to ask a patient who couldn't answer in the conventional way that had not existed before. 2 years after Dominic came through Bay 4, the protocol was adopted by Regional Medical in Corbin. A year after that by Middlesbrough ARH. Celeste was invited to present at a regional nursing conference, which she did once in a conference room in Lexington to an audience of about 40 people. She was not a natural public speaker. She said what she knew, which was specific and grounded and not particularly eloquent, and she answered every question as honestly as she could. She drove home that evening on Route 44. She didn't plan it. It was just the road that went where she was going. But she found herself slowing near the Elm Street overpass, the late afternoon light coming low across the tree line, the guardrail on the right where Dominic had been found. She pulled over and sat for a moment in the quiet. She thought about what he'd said, to be sitting there with all of it inside you and not be able to make it come out. She had not saved Dominic with any special knowledge. She hadn't diagnosed him that morning. She wasn't a physician, and the protocol she would eventually help build hadn't existed yet. She had done something much smaller and, in retrospect, much more essential. She had sat down. She had stayed. She had listened to a man speaking in broken pieces and decided, in the absence of any institutional support for that decision, that the pieces were worth something. The bar had not been high. And that, she thought, watching the last of the daylight move across the guardrail, was the most important thing she'd taken from that morning. Not the protocol, not the conference, not the formal acknowledgement that eventually came. The bar had not been high. A chair pulled from a corner, a cup of water, 15 minutes of not walking away. She pulled back onto Route 44 and drove home. The first Christmas card arrived 8 months after Dominic was discharged. It was a standard card, the kind you buy in a box of 20. A winter scene, a wreath, a generic seasonal greeting printed inside. He had crossed out the printed greeting and written his own in the careful, effortful hand of a man who had worked to get his writing back. You sat down. Thank you. She kept it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink through January. The second one arrived the following December. Different card, same handwriting, 4 words in the same place inside. You sat down. Thank you. She had 3 of them now, lined up on the windowsill where she could see them while she made coffee in the mornings. Same 4 words every year in handwriting that had gotten a little steadier each time. She thought, sometimes, about the transfer van that had been scheduled for 2 o'clock. She thought about Bay 4 at 9 in the morning and the curtain she'd pushed back and the man who'd looked at her with eyes she'd almost talked herself into dismissing. She thought about what it means to listen. Not to fix, not to diagnose, not to move someone efficiently from one place to the next. To sit down and stay in a system that is always asking everyone to move faster and decide that the person in front of you is worth the time that it takes. It is a small thing. It is not a small thing at all.